Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be getting started very soon. If you would please go on mute, that would be very helpful to us. My name is Katie, and I'm going to be running tech for today's Story Circle, and I'm joined by Cindy Shepard and Princess Harris.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome.
Good morning.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Katie, should we start? Okay, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming to join us for our monthly Story Circle with Faith in Place. Like I say, I welcome you all and thank you all for joining. Today, we have a Story Circle featuring Dawn Blackman. Well, before we start with Dawn, I would just like to just give a brief overview of Migration and Me, and how the Migration and Me program came about and why we like to share our stories through Migration and Me. So Migration and Me was started by one of our employees, one of our co-workers, Veronica Cal, who's our outreach director. And her goal was to try to find a way to bring attention to the monarch butterfly while also bringing attention to people's stories of migration, because as you all know that we all have a story of migration, no matter if it was from another country, from different neighborhoods. We all have a reason as to why we migrated. And so by her doing that, she also brought attention to that of the monarch butterfly, who they migrate all the way from Michoacan, Mexico, to as far as Nova Scotia, Canada. And then it's a generation that trek it back all the way back to Michoacan. And then they just hibernate, or not hibernate, but they just wait it out until for 9 months, and then they start that all over again. And so usually it's like 4 generations of the monarch butterfly before they make it to their endpoint in Nova Scotia and turn around. And that's also compared to like the story of African American migration from the South. And so by her combining those two, it kind of brought, I want to say, a validity and a shared equalness to the plight of other insects or animals that migrate. And we also, in that Faith in Place, we believe that when you know that something else shares a common theme or goal that you do, you kind of care more about it and you want to preserve it. And so that's one of the goals of the Migration and Me program. So from here, I would take it to Cindy Shepard, who introduced us to Dawn Blackman, who has a very interesting story of migration, and she's also an avid gardener, and she would share her story of migration and share some of her tips on how to have a wonderful garden. Cindy?
Thank you, Princess, and welcome everybody. I'm so glad that we've got such a nice group to hear Dawn's story. I met Dawn for the first time when I came on staff at Faith in Place, but she was already sort of legendary in the Champaign-Urbana area where we both live. We're here in central Illinois, and Dawn is the steward. I came to know her as the steward of the Randolph Street Community Garden, which was a piece of property owned by the school district that was just being mowed. And Dawn noticed that and went to the school board and got permission to start a community garden in an area where food access is a real issue. And the garden has just grown and grown up to, I think my last count was 86 garden plots there, and she's helping people grow food that helps them feel at home, including new immigrants to the community. So it's really a a perfect fit for Migration and Me, I thought. Dawn's also traveled widely, and when I asked her to think about a migration story to share, she thought for a little while because she has so many of them. But the story that she settled on was a family story of migration. And as you listen to it, I invite you to register your reactions in the chat box and to think about questions that you might want to talk with her about afterwards. At Faith in Place, we know that migration is natural and beautiful, and we're so happy to celebrate it with you here today. Dawn, you ready to go?
I'm ready, except
Awesome.
I didn't start the garden. I took it over from a grad student who actually did the startup with 8 beds. So, but I've been the steward now. I think this is my 15th year. Princess, you had a question that you wanted to ask me? Or did you want me to do my story? Story? Okay, because everybody's muted, so I'm guessing that you said story. Well, this is a family story, like Cindy said, and it's my mother's migration story, actually. My mother was born in Covington, Tennessee. We think in 1916, she didn't have a birth certificate, she nor any of her siblings. And they relied on a relative who had already immigrated to set her age once she arrived at her endpoint. So some of our birth certificates, my siblings and I, list her as 1916. Some of them listed as 1917, depending on when we were born, because she had contact with another, she was corrected at some point, so nobody was sure. But Covington, Tennessee is a little town about 40 minutes drive from Memphis. It was established in 1824, and it's the seat of Tipton County. When my mother left there were just over 3,000 residents, and now there's just over 10,000 residents. So, but it's considered a big place as cities go. The area had originally been settled by Chickasaw Native American culture. And so many African Americans from that part of the country have Native American ties. In 1920, when my mother left, the town had access to a north-south roadway. It was near the river, had a river port, and it was a typical 1920s Southern town. It was pretty segregated. The main street separated the black part of town from the white part of town. And a lot of people had the same last name. My mother was the second youngest of 11 children. My grandparents had sent their children off to live in Chicago as soon as they were deemed capable, because the area was rife with prejudice. Young Black people could barely get out of elementary school without some kind of trumped up charge or a stint in the labor house or camp. So 2 by 2, like Paul and Silas, my grandparents sent their children north, each 2 sponsoring the next 2, until they remained only home, my mother's and her parents. Her mom was pregnant. And shortly after the last of her older siblings had migrated, she died in childbirth with baby brother. That's what my mother called her younger brother, baby brother. Baby brother and my mother, because everyone in town knew that their parents had planned for them to go to Chicago. When her father died a few months later, Lucille, Seal as she was called, and baby brother were sent north to be raised by her older brother, who was 27 years older than she. She was put on the train. She was no more than 5, possibly only 4. But in those days, it was a different day. Children rode unaccompanied all the time. You could mail a child. You literally could put a 15 cents worth of postage on a card pinned to a child's collar and mail them if they met the weight requirements. So actually, no, they stopped doing that in 1913. So baby brother could have been mailed if he was older. But I had the privilege of having my mother to myself. I'm one of 9 children. I had an illness in high school where she spent almost every day with me at the hospital for 9 months. And she shared a lot about her life with me that I don't know whether she ever had a chance to share with my siblings. But the story that she told me and her still evidenced joy at the trip stayed with me. You see, in the segregated South, you had a colored car, and you also had colored porters, many of whom were related to her. So she and her baby brother were handed off to a cousin on the train. And she said that was the start of her journey. And that was how she became the princess on the train. She recounted the time with just a great deal of joy. She said she was the center of attention. Other cousins who worked in other cars came back to see the princess on the train and the baby brother. She said her neighbors in Covington had packed a sack lunch for her, a box lunch actually. She said she enjoyed it, but everybody was always bringing things for her to eat, sweets, and they took care of the baby, changed the baby, and made sure that she said her prayers, and just one time carried her through the train so she could see what the rest of the train was like. And for her, it was a lifelong memory. She didn't travel again until she went away to beauty culture school as a young adult. But this journey from Covington to Chicago was her time as a center of attention and was remembered with great warmth. And so I always think of it when I hear about people talking about migration in the 20s. Yes, she was sent from Covington for the same reasons everybody else was leaving Covington. They wanted a better way of life. But for her, the journey was one of adventure and joy.
So hi, Dawn. Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you a question. How did her tell you that story? How did that shape you, or did that make you want to have your own story of migrations and travel? Did that inspire you in any kind of way?
You know, I married young, and I was married to a military guy, so we traveled a lot. When some kids are getting ready to start their sophomore year of college, I was already living in a foreign country with a year-old baby. So, and I thought about that the day I got on that plane at O'Hare, headed to Istanbul, Turkey at 19. And I thought, Mommy went on a train by herself with a 4-month-old at 4. You can do this. You can do this. So I did. And I never, it was always an adventure. The next station was always the next adventure. And I never was worried or reticent about what I was going to do when I got there or how I would get on. I just prepared as best I could and went with it.
Is there anything, so what was Istanbul? So the places that can you name some of the places that you've been? And then I can ask some more questions from there.
Carter Musel is a little common defense installation on the road between Gulcik and Istanbul. It's a NATO station. So there were people from all over the world, different countries, and all over the United States. But that was our first overseas assignment. And my thinking at that time was, I'm not going to go and live on base. So we lived downtown among the Turkish people. We didn't live in Little America where people wait to get their base housing. We lived among the Turkish people, and that's what we did every place we went. So we traveled. It was a great place because it's near the line between Europe and Asia. So it was a great jumping off point to go anywhere. Germany, went to Germany, Italy, all over Turkey. I went places in Turkey that were mentioned in the Bible, which was really interesting. And there were just, let's see, Italy. We went to Thailand. We came back over the top of the world and had a chance to stop in some of the Scandinavian countries. Pretty much any place we could get to. And I was silly enough then to hitchhike. So I frequently, because David, my ex, worked weird shifts. He was sleeping when he was home, and when he was awake, he wasn't there. So I would take off with our daughter and take little side trips and go places. So I didn't mind getting in a domush, which is a overly packed VW bus, and going anywhere within its length.
So, well, let me ask you, so was there a real difference between the U.S. and when you went to those different countries, like as far as, did you experience any prejudices like you would here? Culture shock, anything?
When we were there, it was shortly after Vietnam. And I didn't find what I found among the Turkish people was they weren't always happy with our government, but they liked American people. Like I said, we lived in an area that was a Turkish neighborhood, and we did everything that our neighbors did. We learned Turkish. My daughters spoke Turkish as well as she spoke English before we left, because children learn so fast. But when the neighbor ladies went out to cut wheat, we went with them. Otherwise, there's nobody for her to play with. When they went to harvest the olives in the olive grove in front of our house, we went with them and we worked. I always say I was a migrant laborer because at that time, there were never jobs on camp, on the base for enlisted military wives. I mean, you could pack groceries at the BX and like for tips, but that was it. And so I would always kind of immerse myself in whatever culture we were in. My daughter and I went to visit a weaving town where little girls her age and younger were being trained to weave carpets. Although it was not the picture that I later heard about children's labor, because these little girls were 4 and 5 years old, and they got a little bit of weaving done. They learned the tools, and then they'd have a nap, and then they'd have lunch, and then they'd have a playtime. They'd go back and sit at the loom next to an older person. I was the one who wanted to learn to weave, but I was really too old to start as far as they were concerned. But it was a family town, a family business. And so it's very different from the representation that we see with child labor these days.
Okay. So how long did you stay over there? Were you over there in those?
We were off and on. We had different stations off and on for around 7 years. We came home.
Oh, okay.
And but usually your tours were anywhere from 13 months to 3 years is a standard tour.
Okay. So how did that experience shape you and steer you towards what do you do today? Like, what careers did you have after you came back, or what was your focus coming back after you came back?
Well, my family had a catering business when I was a child, And so I had experience, and I had worked for one of the Girl Scout councils in their food service at the camp. And so I went into food service. I was qualified for management positions, so I managed restaurants for 20 years.
Okay. I know I read the article about you that Cindy had sent to me, and I just thought it was so interesting how you were saying that you had, so tell us about how your love for gardening came. And one of the things I found interesting was that you said you didn't know anything about it, but you had an itching to do it, and that you took potato eyes and stuck them in the ground and just waited to see what happened.
When I was a kid, my mother used to give me a potato eye and tell me to plant it. But I didn't know whether, she didn't tell me where the potatoes were going to come. And so I never had any potatoes until I was digging to put on another eye one day and found a little potato. Well, my garden was between the houses and the gangway of a Chicago neighborhood. So there's about a 14-inch piece of dirt and a sidewalk between the houses. And the sun only comes in when it's coming straight down. So it was a wonder anything grew. But that was my first experience with gardening. And finding that potato just excited me so much. I started to scream. Well, the sound echoed between the buildings, and someone thought I was being hurt, and people came, and I got a potato. And then I found 3 other potatoes, and they were about that big. But my mother washed them and sliced them and fried them, and everybody got a little bite of potato for dinner. I think that was the start. It was like free food. Look at that. You put something in the ground and you get food. So I gardened a little bit with a neighbor in Turkey. I say help her pick things. I always like to pick things, but I never did any serious gardening until I started to work with the children. And the children, because they were city kids, didn't know about gardening either. Matter of fact, some of them didn't know that green beans came from someplace before they were at IGA. I gave them snap beans, and some of them had never had them, and they didn't want to try them, and then they want to know where they came from. And I said, well, where do you think they came from? The basement of IGA. And I thought, we can do better than this. We visited IGA. They didn't have a basement, and they didn't have any beans that weren't on the shelf. So we started to grow sprouts in our classroom. And that was just really exciting. It was like free food. You put these seeds in there, and then a few days later, you kept things growing. And we would have a snack of baguettes with Thousand Island dressing and sprouts after school. So sometimes ranch dressing. But when the garden opened and there was space there, and we had relocated close enough to walk, I got one bed, a 10 by 10, 16 by 16 bed for the 10 children. And the master gardener, Christine Bhakti, walked us through planting tomatoes and peppers. And that was how I got started there in the garden.
Where was this first garden at that you started?
Well, the garden is at Randolph. It's between Randolph and Neal at Beardsley Avenue in Champaign.
Oh, okay. And so, how much land do you have now? You said you started off with a small plot. Has it grown since then?
I started off with a 16 by 16 bed, and now we have a 1/4 acre in row crops, and I think 60 beds. It fluctuates because sometimes we get temporary beds. We have some vision impaired gardeners, and when they garden, we haul out these higher beds that can be planted standing. And so anytime we found 2 pieces of wood, we put them next to 2 other pieces of wood, and we call it a bed. So.
Okay. Is this a program that you have where you teach, or can anyone come, or how does that work?
Anybody can come garden. It is also a program. We're a site for the job training program for Unit 4, Urbana, and Rantoul. They have a YES program, Youth Employment Service, that we host children, young people from for every summer. But we also have a standing program. Mondays, we have stories at lunchtime. It's the day for parent and toddler gardening. Parent groups, parents with a child or two come, and mostly they just kind of dig in the bed. I feel like it's a success if at the end of the summer, and when I say it's time to go, they pick up their little tiny tools and go toward the hose. But mostly they just have a lot of fun. But we also have a half-day garden program for neighborhood kids or any kids. It's a drop-in program. It goes on from 8 until noon, Tuesdays through Fridays, where they get, if they're over 12, they get a whole bed, which is 4 by 16. If they're under 12, they share a bed with another gardener. We've had some of the gardeners, one pair of sisters have been gardening with us since 4th or 5th grade and then signed on for the job training program. Okay. And came in to claim their beds. They claim, I post when it's time to claim beds. We want our same beds from the last years because they've been putting soil amendments in and doing good things for it. But we also have a garden market where the children can sell some of their surplus. So we actually plant cash crops to help support the garden. So we have a market either there in the garden or in front of the church, which is kitty corner just across Bradley from the garden. Has more traffic, so it's a good place on Saturdays. And we also have the garden kitchen where we use the church kitchen to teach the children and anybody else who wants to come how to can their surplus.
Okay. I have another question. What would be, is it like if you just have a small, any suggestions for anyone that might be afraid to garden or something that would be easy in a small plot of land or a pot to start off with or something? Just
Yeah.
You know?
There's a lot of things. We plant in a lot of pots. That's why the size of the garden fluctuates, because if somebody gives me a giant container, I turn it into a bed and give it to a 6-year-old to grow. But there's lots of things, and we maintain a seed repository. I never pass up on free seed. And so we give gardeners, anybody who wants to garden can come and get seed. We are planning we have a start table that the last few years we've done starts in, and we give away starts as well. But we're also planning a greenhouse so that we can grow year round and grow more starts. But they can come by. We have a garden library with a lot of different books that'll help them get started. We had a gift of a lot of American Gardener magazines. It doesn't change. The information doesn't change. So that way I can give people something to take away with them if they want to take it. And I'm more than happy to help anybody learn to garden. If you have a space, that's great. If you don't have a space, we will make a space. We still have a hill that we've permission to garden, and then we want to put terrace gardens on it. So there'll be some more opportunities. And we're trying to extend the garden through the expansion program by helping people to garden in front of their homes, in the space between the sidewalk and the curb. So last year, we had a young lady start over on the other side of State Street, which is wonderful. So, and then I'm meeting next week sometime with 2 young women who are interested in helping to shepherd that effort.
You want to know something that's funny, Dawn? It's like, so I was with my auntie and she's like 70 something, and I just had never thought about it. She was like, why do we keep buying? Because I was like, what are you doing? She was like, well, I'm harvesting the seeds from my peppers and jalapenos and all of that. And it's just like, I just never thought about that. Isn't that like crazy that you never thought about harvesting the seeds from your own produce? So do you all do that?
Initially, that was how we did everything. We only planted heirlooms, and we harvested our seed. But so much of what is sold in the marketplace are hybrids, and they don't reproduce. Hybrid tomatoes, those big boy tomatoes, you might get some greenery, but you're not going to get any fruit. Cherry tomatoes will produce fruit, but that's a big problem. If you're getting food that's been irradiated or food that is a hybrid, it's not going to reproduce. So we've actually been providing the seed from our harvested seed for new gardeners every year. And I knew we were going to eventually run out of space because the garden was growing so fast. So we'd give them all of their seed the first year, half of the seed the second year, and a quarter of the seed the third year. But if they moved their garden bed home, then we went back to giving them 100% of the seed because now they got to buy tools. So, but the whole thrust has been to train people in the garden, but have them move with their gardens home. And usually it takes 3, sometimes 4 years to convince the landlord that yes, it's okay to dig up the yard and put in a garden. So.
Okay, I see in the comment section that Cindy said that you have purple okra. And so I want to tell you my story. Like this summer, I grew okra for the first time. And Dawn, you want to know, I was really upset because that is such a beautiful flower and it only lasts for one day. I was so upset. I was like, oh my goodness. But I really want to learn how to pickle okra.
Pickled okra, we did pickled okra, pickled beans, pickled asparagus, tomatoes, tomato sauce. Just all kinds of things. On our Facebook page, we've got some photographs of the kids, boys included, with the things that they pickled.
Okay, so that's the cycle of the okra. They just have that beautiful plant, and then that's where the okra comes from, right? Once you see that flower.
Right. You know what? I always say that my next wedding, I'm going to have okra and okra flowers and lilies of the valley. Well, they grow at opposite ends of the calendar, and neither of them last very long. So I don't think I'm getting married.
Yeah. I don't know how you're going to do that one. But it's such a beautiful flower that lasts for only one day. So eggplant flowers too. Really, eggplant has, I never noticed eggplant flowers. So I'm going to open up. Cindy, do you have anything to add or ask?
I just, one thing when Dawn said that they had row crops this year, and I wanted to know what the crop was, and it's pinto beans. And I just think that's interesting in light of migration. Dawn, you want to say something about why those pinto beans are planted?
Well, we have, 3, maybe, I think 5 families from Guatemala who are Mayan speakers who garden with us. And when more land became available, we didn't have money for wood to build beds. And they had been farmers in Guatemala. So they asked if they could grow on that land. And I didn't want it to go fallow even the first year that we had it. So we had planted sunflowers to kind of as an insurance for heavy metals. We didn't know, but just in case. And so I gave them that land to plant on, and they plant pinto beans, a few squash late just for the blossoms, and they also plant nightshade because it's a vegetable, sought after vegetable in that culture. So I've learned so much from different gardeners from all over the world. We had 9 languages spoken in the garden last year. So there were just people who come. So many cultures are still growing, farming cultures. And when they come here for whatever reason, there's usually a mom or a grandmom or somebody who's home and wants to get in the dirt. And so we've had people from, North Africa. We've had people from Indonesia. We've had people from China, people from Nepal. I mean, we planted last year these giant gourds that were gifts of seeds from one of our gardeners from Nepal. And we adopted a garden greeting of namaste because she spoke very little English when she came to us. And that was a way to make her feel a little more comfortable. And when she first came, she didn't want to be in the garden unless I was there. But when the family moved on 4 years later, I would drive by anytime of morning or evening, and there she'd be. Learned a lot from her. When you take something out, you put something else in right away.
Yeah. I just have you said something really interesting when you mentioned something about the sunflowers and the heavy toxins. What's the connection between that?
Sunflowers, pull heavy metals out of soil when you plant them.
I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Oh, that's something to keep in mind.
Our history is kind of varied. On the north end, there were toxic waste sites, and I'm kind of an untrusting person. But we don't always have money to do though. That's an expensive test to do. So before we open up new land, I always plant sunflowers to just as insurance.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Do we have any questions?
There's a question in the chat box from Douglas Williams, and he
Hi,
asked,
Dad.
Hey, Dawn. Hello, Cindy.
you can ask your own question.
Okay. Well, hello to everyone else too. So it's great to hear you, Dawn. Can you share a little bit more about your family history of even some of those stories about possible gardens or agricultural impacts that were carried from the South, maybe that you maybe even had during your early education before you went off to overseas, and how that may have impacted your work?
Big brother, which is what my mother called the brother who raised her, big brother, and had a huge garden. He bought us greens and bushel baskets of stuff, which, in a household the size of ours didn't last very long. My mother did very little canning, just pears, and made grape jelly. But so there was a garden tradition in the family that I wasn't part of. He didn't. I have to tell you, there's 6 years between the top 5 and the bottom 4 in my family. There are 9 of us. I'm in the middle. The big kids got to go to Uncle Clint's to help. And we little kids didn't get to go. We got to learn how to snap beans and those kinds of things, but we didn't actually go and work in the garden. So, but there was a garden tradition in our family because we had a lot of good vegetables coming up from it, and blueberries. Doug was here as a student when I first went to the garden, and he drew a map of the garden for us because we had a grant I was applying for that wanted a map, and they didn't think my little map they weren't impressed by my notebook paper map. And Doug drew us a layout, and I have used it continually. Every time he put in a new bed or a new shrub or something, I pencil it in, copy it again.
Dawn, I have a question. So when you said, so I know you were talking about how you had, I forgot how many people, how many different, did you say did you learn anything as far as any different techniques as far as maybe canning or preserving or gardening from those different?
A lot of different techniques. I did not know, for instance, that amaranth, which we were treating as a weed, was edible until one of the families from Guatemala. She thought I was harvesting amaranth for dinner, and then I was throwing it in the compost, and she said, "Why? It's good to eat." Well, she lives near the garden, and I thought she was pulling it too. She was just picking it to go home for dinner. So she brought me some over. It's delicious. When I look it up, it's a high vitamin vegetable with protein, just like the lamb's quarter. We were pulling up lamb's quarter to make room for real food, and perfectly edible, persilade. So one of the things that I encourage my gardeners to do, and that we make a practice in the beds that we harvest for the cash crop, is to go with what volunteers and to incorporate that into our food system. So we have beds. Last year we used amaranth as a cover crop, and we'll be doing that again this year. It grows, it covers everything, it chokes out everything else. You can harvest it a row at a time as you plant. It keeps the soil loose. It's fabulous. I love it.
Okay. So I have one question that I like to ask anyone who likes to garden in different parts of Illinois. Have you ever seen or ate a pawpaw?
Oh yes, pawpaws. On our foraging tour last year, on one of our foraging tours, we found 3 pawpaw trees within walking distance of the garden, straight up the alley in the public right of way. So
okay, well, I have to come because I need to see this pawpaw. I've been hearing so many things about it. And what does it taste like, Dawn?
oh gosh, it tastes like a creamy pudding. You just kind of,
Okay.
oh, it's really good. I'm trying to grow some. They replant themselves. A pawpaw tree will have dozens of little tiny pawpaws trees around it, and usually the owners just mow them down. But I saved some, and I planted them. I kept trying to find, instructions. I went online, I asked people, and then I decided that, in nature, they fall on the ground and they grow. So I just planted the whole pawpaw and in a bucket, and I got a pawpaw, but I didn't protect it well enough. It was too young when I set it out, so it didn't survive. But I would like to have a pawpaw tree in the garden. We have fruit trees there, service berries, apples, cherries.
How long does a pawpaw take? I mean, being a tree, right? It takes some time to get.
It takes a long time.
Okay.
It takes a long time. And so I'm probably when I do the next one, I'll keep transferring it to bigger and bigger buckets. And then before I put it out, it doesn't bear, and they're very tall. So the only way you can harvest them most of the time is wait for the fruit to fall on the ground. That's how you know it's ripe. Is it on the ground? Okay, it's ready.
Okay. Well, Dawn, I'm going to ask you this in front of witnesses. When I come there, can you please take me to a pawpaw?
I can take you to a pawpaw tree very easily. Like I said, it's only a couple of blocks down from the garden, and it has a very distinctive trunk. Once you see a pawpaw tree, the trunk and the way the bark grows, you'll always recognize a pawpaw tree.
Okay, I'm excited. I'm excited. I want to ask one more thing. What's your so when you forage, is it just in the neighborhood? Like, have you ever seen mushrooms or these morel mushrooms that people are so excited about, or anything like that?
No, I found 4 morel mushrooms in the front yard of one of my church members' house. And so I wanted to eat them so bad, but I didn't. I put them in an orange bag, and I took them and I shook them in an area that I hoped they would grow in the garden, but it did not work. They are not cooperative. They are volunteers, and they like to know where they like to pick their own place.
Okay. So does anyone else have any questions? Cindy, you have anything? Okay, but Dawn, would you like to say anything to us in closing before we close out, like as far as gardening, or some tips, or just keep our head up, or whatever?
Well,
words of encouragement.
This year, COVID has forced me to get more technologically use more technology. So I am putting together a Google Calendar with all of our summer and our spring work days, project days on it, and we're always looking for volunteers. Last year, when school was dismissed, so were our groups of volunteers that come to help. So we were a little behind the 8 ball most of the summer until some of the churches that have helped us in the past stepped up to help us. But we use the food that we grow in food boxes that we give away at the church. And we also have events at the garden. We have a garden Facebook page, so check us out. Let you know what's going on, and when there's opportunities to get together. The garden is not just a place for growing food. It is a place for growing community, and everybody's welcome.
Okay. All right, Dawn. Well, I want to thank you for that. I mean, it was very inspirational, and like I say, I truly appreciate you sharing your story with us, and I cannot wait to meet you in person and find some pawpaws. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming out. I truly appreciate you all, and thank you. Cindy, thank you for this connection.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Faith and Place.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
What is your, Dawn, what is your Facebook page?
name.
Randolph Street Community Garden on Facebook. We also have a GoFundMe page because we're fundraising to do things for the garden as well. And it's Randolph Street Community Garden Expansion Project. So,
Thank you. It's good work you're doing.
praise
Yes,
God.
excellent. Okay. All righty.
Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Thank you.